The morning sun cast long shadows across the marble floors of Windsor Castle, as Catherine Wales stood before an ornate mirror, her reflection showing a woman who had no idea that in just a few hours she would make history. The date was January 9th, and while most people were simply marking another Tuesday, this particular day would forever change the British royal family and captivate millions around the world. What started as a quiet birthday celebration would transform into a moment so extraordinary that even the most seasoned royal watchers would struggle to find precedent in over 1,000 years of monarchy. Catherine had always been known for her grace, her dedication to duty, and her unwavering support of the crown, but nothing could have prepared her, or the nation, for what King Charles III was about to announce. The secret had been kept so tightly that only 3 people in the entire royal household knew what was coming. Not even William, Catherine's husband and heir to the throne, had been fully informed of the magnitude of his father's decision. Palace staff had noticed unusual activity in recent weeks. Private meetings behind closed doors, encrypted communications with Parliament, and mysterious consultations with constitutional lawyers that stretched late into the night. As Catherine adjusted the simple pearl necklace that had become her signature, she remained completely unaware that news crews were already positioning themselves outside Buckingham Palace, that social media was about to explode with speculation, and that her life was about to take a turn that would echo through generations. The woman looking back at her from the mirror was still simply Catherine. Devoted mother, loving wife, and committed royal. In a few hours, she would become something unprecedented in British history. This is the story of how an ordinary Tuesday became extraordinary, how a birthday gift became a constitutional milestone, and how Catherine Wales stunned not just Britain, but the entire world, with an honor so rare and revolutionary that it would redefine what it means to be royal in the modern age. Catherine's eyes opened naturally at 6 in the morning, just as they had every day for the past decade. The winter darkness still clung to the windows of Adelaide Cottage, and she could hear the gentle breathing of William beside her. 44 years old today, she thought to herself, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. It seemed impossible that so much time had passed since she first met William at university, when they were both young and carefree, with no idea of the extraordinary path that lay ahead. She slipped quietly from the bed, careful not to wake her husband, who had been working late into the night on preparations for an upcoming state visit. The floorboards creaked slightly under her feet as she made her way to the kitchen, a sound that had become as familiar as her own heartbeat. This was her favorite time of day, these quiet moments before the world awakened and duty called. The coffee machine hummed to life as she pressed the button, and Catherine found herself gazing out at the frost-covered gardens of their home. The children would be up soon, and the day would begin in earnest. But for now, she treasured this peaceful solitude. She had learned over the years that these small moments of normalcy were precious gifts, to be savored whenever possible. Her phone buzzed softly on the counter, displaying a message from her private secretary about the day's schedule. A few meetings, a visit to a local children's hospital, and dinner with family to celebrate her birthday. Nothing unusual, nothing that suggested this day would be any different from countless others. She scrolled through the messages from friends and family wishing her well, each one bringing warmth to her heart. As she sipped her coffee, Catherine reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. The shy girl from Berkshire who'd caught the eye of a prince seemed like a different person entirely. Over the years, she had grown into her role, finding her voice and her purpose within the ancient institution of the monarchy. She had learned to navigate the complex world of royal protocol while maintaining her authenticity, a balance that had not always been easy to strike. The sound of footsteps on the stairs interrupted her thoughts. George appeared first, his hair tousled from sleep, followed closely by Charlotte and Louis. Her heart swelled with love as she watched them, these 3 remarkable children, who had taught her more about strength and purpose than any royal training ever could. "Happy birthday, Mummy," Charlotte said, wrapping her arms around Catherine's waist. The simple gesture filled her with joy, reminding her of what truly mattered in life. These were the moments she cherished most, the ordinary family interactions that grounded her in reality. William appeared a few minutes later, already dressed for the day, but taking time to kiss his wife and wish her well. They had been married for over a decade, yet she still felt a flutter of happiness when he smiled at her in that special way, the look that said she was his partner in everything, both personal and professional. "Any special birthday wishes?" he asked, his eyes twinkling with mischief. Catherine laughed, knowing that he was probably planning something, though she could never have imagined what his father had in mind. The morning proceeded with its usual rhythm. The children were helped into their school uniforms, Breakfast was served around the kitchen table, and the familiar chaos of family life unfolded. Catherine found herself marveling at how normal everything felt, how these domestic routines had become the foundation of her happiness. Her protection officer arrived precisely at 9, and Catherine gathered her things for the day ahead. The children hugged her goodbye, and William kissed her forehead, promising to see her that evening for her birthday dinner. As she stepped out into the crisp January air, she had no idea that miles away, final preparations were being made for an announcement that would change everything. The drive to her first engagement took her through the familiar countryside of Berkshire, past fields and villages that had become as dear to her as her childhood home. She used this time to review her notes for the hospital visit, always wanting to be fully prepared to meet with patients and families who were facing difficult times. At the children's hospital, Catherine moved through the wards with practiced ease, her genuine warmth evident in every interaction. She had developed a particular passion for children's causes over the years, and these visits never felt like work to her. The young patients' faces lit up when she entered their rooms, and she spent far longer than scheduled with each family, listening to their stories and offering comfort where she could. One little girl, barely 5 years old and bravely fighting a serious illness, presented Catherine with a hand-drawn birthday card. The simple gesture moved her to tears, and she carefully tucked the card into her bag, knowing it would become one of her most treasured possessions. The medical staff spoke with admiration about Catherine's impact on their work, how her patronage had brought not just funding but genuine awareness to their cause. She had never sought praise for these efforts, but hearing about the real difference she was making reinforced her sense of purpose. As the morning visit concluded, Catherine's private secretary approached with a subtle but urgent expression. There had been a change to the afternoon schedule, she was told. Instead of the planned meeting with charity representatives, she was requested at Buckingham Palace for an important discussion with the king. Catherine felt a flutter of concern, wondering if something had happened within the family. Charles had seemed well when she last saw him, but the urgency of the summons was unusual. She tried to push away worried thoughts as her car made its way through London traffic toward the palace. The familiar red brick facade of Buckingham Palace came into view, its windows gleaming in the pale winter sunlight. Catherine had walked through these halls countless times, but today something felt different. There was an energy in the air, a sense of anticipation that she could not quite identify. Her footsteps echoed on the marble floors as she made her way to the king's private study. The paintings lining the corridors seemed to watch her progress, centuries of royal history bearing silent witness to whatever was about to unfold. She paused briefly before the door, straightening her shoulders and preparing herself for whatever news awaited. The king's equerry opened the door with unusual formality, and Catherine stepped inside to find Charles standing by the window, his expression serious, yet warm. The afternoon light cast long shadows across the room, highlighting the weight of history that seemed to permeate every corner of the palace. "Catherine, my dear, thank you for coming," Charles said, gesturing for her to take a seat. His tone was measured, careful, as if he were choosing each word with particular precision. She had known him for many years now, first as William's father and then as her father-in-law, but today he seemed to be speaking to her in his capacity as king. "I hope everything is well, Your Majesty," Catherine replied, using the formal address that protocol required, even within the family. She studied his face, trying to read the emotions behind his composed exterior. Charles moved to his desk, where a leather folder lay closed, its contents hidden from view. The room fell silent, except for the distant sounds of London traffic and the ticking of an antique clock on the mantelpiece. Catherine felt her heartbeat quicken, though she could not say why. "What I am about to discuss with you has never been done before in the history of our monarchy," Charles began, his words measured and deliberate. "It represents a significant departure from tradition, one that I believe is necessary for the future of our institution." Catherine's mind raced, trying to imagine what could warrant such an introduction. She had always respected the king's wisdom and his commitment to modernizing the monarchy while preserving its essential character. Whatever he was about to propose, she knew it would be carefully considered and historically significant. The leather folder remained unopened, its secrets still hidden, as Charles continued to speak about tradition, innovation, and the changing role of the royal family in contemporary society. Catherine listened intently, aware that this moment was building toward something unprecedented, something that would mark this ordinary Tuesday as extraordinary in the annals of royal history. Outside the study windows, London continued its daily rhythm, unaware that within the walls of Buckingham Palace, a conversation was taking place that would soon capture the attention of the entire world. The afternoon sun continued its slow arc across the sky, and Catherine's 44th birthday was about to become a date that would be remembered for generations to come. Charles finally opened the leather folder, revealing documents that bore the royal seal and the signatures of constitutional lawyers, parliamentary advisors, and senior members of the royal household. Catherine caught glimpses of official letterheads and dense legal text, but the king's words commanded her full attention as he began to explain the magnitude of what lay before them. Catherine, in my years as heir to the throne, I witnessed the evolution of our monarchy through times of great change, Charles continued, his voice carrying the weight of decades of observation and preparation. Your mother-in-law, my beloved mother, showed us how the institution could adapt while maintaining its dignity and purpose. Now, as king, I believe we must take another significant step forward. Catherine nodded, remembering Queen Elizabeth II's remarkable ability to modernize gradually while respecting tradition. She had learned much from observing the late Queen's approach to duty and service, values that had become central to her own royal work. What I am proposing has required months of constitutional research and consultation with our finest legal minds, Charles explained, lifting a document from the folder. The precedents are limited and ancient, but they exist. What has never existed is the political will and public support to implement such a change. The suspense in the room was palpable as Catherine waited to learn what this revolutionary proposal might be. She had grown accustomed to the careful pace of royal decision-making, the way significant changes were considered from every angle before implementation. But this felt different, more urgent somehow. I am creating a new title within the British peerage, Charles announced, his words falling into the silence like stones into still water. Not for a man, as has been traditional, but for a woman who has proven herself through years of dedicated service. A title that recognizes not just noble birth, but merit, dedication, and the trust of the people. Catherine felt her breath catch in her throat. The implications of what the king was suggesting began to dawn on her, though the full scope remained unclear. Titles within the British system carried enormous constitutional significance, affecting everything from parliamentary procedure to the line of succession. The title I am proposing to create is Duchess Royal, Charles continued, watching Catherine's reaction carefully. It would be held independently, not through marriage, and would carry with it certain prerogatives that have never been granted to anyone outside the direct line of succession. The term Duchess Royal hung in the air between them, its significance slowly settling into Catherine's understanding. She knew enough about royal history to recognize that this was indeed unprecedented, a complete departure from centuries of tradition that had limited such honors to those born into the royal line. Your Majesty, I am honored by your consideration, but I must ask what this would mean practically. Catherine managed to say, her voice steady despite the enormity of what was being proposed. How would such a title function within our existing constitutional framework? Charles smiled, pleased by her thoughtful response. This was exactly why he had chosen her for this historic honor. Where others might have been overwhelmed by the grandeur of the gesture, Catherine immediately focused on the practical implications and responsibilities that would come with it. The Duchess Royal would have the right to speak in the House of Lords on matters of national importance, Charles explained, consulting his notes. She would take precedence over all other duchesses, ranking immediately after members of the royal family. Most significantly, she would have the constitutional right to advise the crown on matters affecting the realm. Catherine's mind reeled at the implications. The right to address Parliament, to influence national policy, to serve as an official advisor to the crown. These were powers that no consort had ever held independently. The weight of such responsibility was both thrilling and terrifying. There would also be certain ceremonial privileges, Charles continued. The Duchess Royal would have her own coat of arms, granted by the College of Arms, and would be entitled to a personal standard. During state occasions, she would process separately from other members of the royal family, acknowledging her unique position. The king paused, allowing Catherine to absorb this information. She found herself thinking of the generations of royal women who had served with distinction but had never been granted such recognition in their own right. The historical significance of what was being offered was staggering. Why now? Catherine asked, the question that had been forming since the conversation began. What has prompted this decision at this particular moment? Charles set down the documents and looked directly at her, his expression reflecting years of careful consideration. Because you have proven that excellence in royal service can come from merit as well as birth. Because the British people have shown unprecedented support for your work. And because our monarchy must continue to evolve if it is to remain relevant and respected. He moved to a window overlooking the palace gardens, his silhouette framed against the winter afternoon. The opinion polls consistently show that you are among the most trusted and admired figures in public life. Your charitable work has raised hundreds of millions of pounds. Your diplomatic efforts have strengthened our relationships with key allies. Most importantly, you have shown that it is possible to be both thoroughly modern and deeply respectful of tradition. Catherine felt a mixture of pride and humility at his words. She had never sought personal recognition for her royal duties, viewing them as a natural extension of her commitment to William and to the people they served. To have that work acknowledged at the highest level was deeply moving. The creation of the Duchess Royal title would also serve a practical purpose, Charles continued. As the monarchy continues to slim down, we need senior members of the family who can carry out the increasing workload. This title would formalize your role and give you the authority necessary to fulfill these expanded responsibilities. The practical considerations were indeed significant. Catherine had observed how the working members of the royal family had taken on ever greater responsibilities as the institution modernized. Creating a framework for recognizing and empowering key figures made constitutional sense. I must ask about William's reaction, Catherine said carefully. Such a significant change would affect him as well, both personally and in his role as heir to the throne. Charles's expression softened, showing the warmth of a father as well as a king. William has been consulted throughout this process. In fact, he has been one of the strongest advocates for this decision. He recognizes, perhaps better than anyone, your contributions to the crown and the nation.
Relief flooded through Catherine at this revelation.
The thought that such a momentous decision might create tension within her marriage had been a growing concern. Knowing that William supported and even championed the proposal made it feel like a true partnership rather than an individual honor. There is, of course, the matter of public reaction, Charles acknowledged, returning to his desk. Change, even positive change, can be met with skepticism. We have prepared comprehensive briefings for the media, emphasizing the historical precedents and constitutional soundness of the decision. Catherine nodded, understanding the delicate nature of public opinion when it came to royal matters. She had learned over the years how to navigate media attention, but nothing had prepared her for the scrutiny that would accompany such an unprecedented announcement. The Prime Minister has been briefed and has given his full support, Charles continued. The Archbishop of Canterbury has also been consulted, as there are certain ceremonial aspects that would require ecclesiastical involvement. The legal framework has been thoroughly examined by the finest constitutional scholars in the nation. The comprehensiveness of the preparation was impressive, demonstrating the seriousness with which this decision had been approached. Catherine could see that no detail had been overlooked, no potential challenge left unaddressed. I need you to understand, Catherine, that accepting this title would change your role fundamentally, Charles said, his tone becoming more serious. You would no longer simply be supporting William in his duties. You would have independent responsibilities to the crown and to the nation. The weight of that obligation is considerable. Catherine sat quietly for several moments, processing the full magnitude of what was being offered. The title of Duchess Royal represented not just honor but enormous responsibility. It would mean stepping forward as an individual leader, not just as part of a partnership. When would this take effect? She asked, beginning to engage with the practical timeline of such a momentous change. I had hoped to make the announcement today, on your birthday, Charles replied, with a slight smile. It seemed fitting that such a historic moment should coincide with a personal celebration. The formal ceremony would take place in several weeks, allowing time for proper preparation and public education about the significance of the title. The idea that this extraordinary honor might be announced on her birthday added another layer of significance to an already overwhelming proposal. Catherine found herself thinking about the little girl who had given her the hand-drawn card that morning, about the normal family breakfast, about how ordinary the day had begun. I am deeply honored by your confidence in me, Your Majesty, Catherine said finally, her voice carrying the weight of decision. But I must ask for time to fully consider the implications of such a significant step. I would expect nothing less. This decision should not be made lightly. Take the time you need to discuss this with William, to consider the impact on your children, and to prepare yourself for what would undoubtedly be a historic moment. As the afternoon light began to fade outside the study windows, Catherine realized that her quiet Tuesday had transformed into something that would resonate through history. The documents in the leather folder represented not just a personal honor, but a fundamental evolution in the British monarchy, one that would be studied and discussed for generations to come. The drive back to Adelaide Cottage seemed longer than usual, though Catherine knew the route by heart. Her mind churned with the enormity of what had just been proposed, each mile giving her more time to process the implications of becoming the first Duchess Royal in British history. The familiar countryside looked different somehow. as if the very landscape had shifted with the weight of this unprecedented offer. Her protection officer, trained to read the subtle changes in his charge's demeanor, maintained professional silence while remaining alert to her mood. Catherine stared out the window at the passing fields and villages, thinking about the millions of people who lived their lives largely unaware of the constitutional complexities that governed their nation. Soon, if she accepted this title, she would bear a responsibility to all of them, in a way she never had before. William was waiting for her when she arrived home, his expression a careful mixture of anticipation and concern. The children were still at school, giving them precious privacy to discuss what could be the most significant decision of their marriage. He took one look at her face and knew immediately that the afternoon had been far more momentous than either of them had anticipated. "How much did you know?" Catherine asked as soon as they were alone in their sitting room, the familiar comfort of home providing a stark contrast to the formal grandeur of Buckingham Palace. William ran his hand through his hair, a gesture she recognized as his response to stress or deep emotion. "I knew Father was considering something significant, but he wanted to present it to you first, to gauge your reaction before we discussed it as a family. I supported the idea in principle, but I needed to see how you felt about it." Catherine sank into her favorite armchair, the same one where she read bedtime stories to the children and reviewed charitable reports in the evenings. The normalcy of the setting made the extraordinary nature of the afternoon's conversation seem almost surreal. "Duchess Royal," she said aloud, testing how the words sounded in the familiar space of their home. "William, do you understand what this would mean for us, for our family, for everything we've built together?" William moved to sit across from her, leaning forward with the intensity that marked their most serious conversations. "I've thought about little else since Father first broached the subject with me months ago. Catherine, you've earned this recognition through your own merit, your own dedication. It's not being offered because you're my wife, but because of who you are and what you've accomplished." The distinction was important, Catherine realized. Throughout her royal career, she had worked to establish her own identity in areas of focus, always conscious of being seen as an individual contributor, rather than merely an appendage to William's role. This title would formalize that independence in the most dramatic way possible. "But what about the children?" Catherine asked, voicing one of her deepest concerns. "How do we explain to George, Charlotte, and Louis that their mother has suddenly become something that has never existed before? How do we help them understand the significance without making them feel different from their peers?" William's expression softened as he considered their children, the three young people who remained their top priority despite all royal obligations. "We've always taught them that service comes with privilege, that our family's position brings both opportunities and responsibilities." This would be an extension of those lessons, wouldn't it? Catherine nodded slowly, thinking about the conversations they'd had with their children, about royal duty, about using privilege to help others, about the importance of remaining grounded despite extraordinary circumstances. The title of Duchess Royal would certainly provide new teaching moments, but it would also bring challenges they had never faced before. "The scrutiny will be intense," Catherine observed, thinking about the media attention that had followed every aspect of her royal journey. "Not just from the British press, but from around the world. Every decision I make, every cause I champion, every word I speak in the House of Lords will be analyzed and debated." William reached across to take her hand, a gesture that had comforted her through every major decision of their life together. "You've handled scrutiny before. Remember when we were first married, how overwhelming it seemed? But you found your way, you found your voice. This would be different in scale, but not fundamentally different in nature." Catherine remembered those early years, the pressure to establish herself as a worthy addition to the royal family, the careful navigation between tradition and modernity that had defined her approach to royal service. She had survived and thrived through challenges that had seemed insurmountable at the time. "What about your role as heir?" Catherine asked, addressing another layer of complexity. "How does the king's daughter-in-law becoming Duchess Royal affect the succession, affect your preparation for eventually becoming king?" William had clearly given this considerable thought. "If anything, it strengthens the monarchy. Having a Duchess Royal who can represent the crown independently, who can take on additional responsibilities and engagements, actually supports my role rather than competing with it. We would be partners in service in a more formal way than ever before." The partnership aspect resonated with Catherine. Their marriage had always been built on mutual support and shared commitment to their royal duties. The idea that this unprecedented title could strengthen rather than complicate that partnership was reassuring. They were interrupted by the sound of the front door opening and the familiar chaos of children returning from school. George, Charlotte, and Louis burst into the house with their typical energy, full of stories about their day, and excited about their mother's birthday celebration that evening. Catherine felt a pang of normalcy as she helped with homework and listened to their chatter, wondering how this domestic tranquility might change if she accepted the king's offer. During dinner preparation, as Catherine and William worked together in the kitchen while the children played nearby, they continued their conversation in quiet voices. The ordinariness of the setting, chopping vegetables, setting the table, checking on homework, provided a grounding counterpoint to the extraordinary decision that loomed before them. "I keep thinking about the historical significance," Catherine admitted as she stirred a pot of soup. "To be the first woman to hold such a title independently, to potentially influence legislation and policy in ways that no royal consort has ever done, the responsibility is overwhelming." William paused in his task of setting the table, considering her words carefully. "But isn't that exactly why Father chose you? Because you do feel the weight of responsibility, because you understand the significance, because you would never take such power lightly." The observation struck Catherine as fundamentally true. Throughout her royal career, she had been careful to use her platform responsibly, to research thoroughly before championing causes, to consider the broader implications of her actions. These qualities that had guided her as a senior royal would be even more crucial as Duchess Royal. As evening approached, and the family gathered for Catherine's birthday dinner, the atmosphere was warm and celebratory. Yet Catherine found herself studying her loved ones with new eyes. If she accepted this title, how would it change their dynamics? Would William's siblings view her differently? Would extended family members feel that she had overstepped traditional boundaries? The children presented her with handmade birthday cards and small gifts, their faces glowing with pride and affection. Charlotte had written a poem about how much she loved her mother, while George had drawn a picture of their family together. Louis, the youngest, had crafted a simple bracelet from colorful beads. These tokens of love felt more precious than any royal regalia ever could. After the children were tucked into bed, Catherine and William sat by the fireplace in their sitting room, the same space where they had begun this momentous conversation hours earlier. The day that had started so normally had become one of the most significant of Catherine's life. Yet the evening ended in the familiar comfort of home and family. "I need to understand the historical precedents better," Catherine said, curling up beside William on the sofa. "If I'm going to make this decision, I need to fully comprehend what previous generations of royal women faced when they broke new ground." William nodded, understanding her need for thorough research. Father mentioned that the royal librarians have prepared extensive briefings on similar situations throughout European royal history. There are precedents, even if they're not exact matches. Catherine thought about Queen Elizabeth II's careful navigation of changing times, about Diana's bold approach to royal philanthropy, about other royal women throughout history who had pushed boundaries while respecting tradition. Each had faced criticism and praise in equal measure, but they had paved the way for future generations. "What does your heart tell you?" William asked quietly, the question that cut through all the constitutional complexity and historical significance to the core of the matter. Catherine was quiet for a long moment, listening to the crackling of the fire and the distant sounds of their sleeping children. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a mixture of trepidation and determination. "My heart tells me that if I have the opportunity to serve the British people in a greater capacity, if I can use a platform like this to advance causes I care about, if I can help modernize the monarchy while respecting its traditions, then I have an obligation to consider it seriously." William squeezed her hand, recognizing the courage it took for her to even contemplate such a momentous step. They both understood that accepting the title of Duchess Royal would change not just Catherine's life, but the trajectory of the British monarchy itself. "We should talk to the children," Catherine said finally. "Not about the specific details, but about the general concept of increased responsibility and service. They deserve to understand that change might be coming, even if we frame it carefully." As the evening drew to a close, Catherine realized that her 44th birthday had indeed become historic, though not in any way she could have imagined when she woke that morning. The quiet Tuesday had transformed into a day of unprecedented possibility, one that would be remembered regardless of what decision she ultimately made. The weight of choice pressed upon her as she prepared for bed, knowing that tomorrow would bring new conversations, deeper analysis, and ultimately, a decision that would echo through generations of British history. The ordinary woman who had awakened that morning was still there, but she now carried the potential to become something extraordinary, something that had never existed before in over 1,000 years of monarchy. The following morning brought a crispness to the January air that seemed to mirror the clarity Catherine felt as she awakened. She had slept better than expected, her subconscious apparently having worked through much of the emotional complexity while she rested. William was already up, she noticed. probably having risen early to review the historical documents that had been delivered from the Royal Library the previous evening. Catherine found him in his study, surrounded by leather-bound volumes and modern printouts, his reading glasses perched on his nose as he absorbed centuries of constitutional precedent. The sight of him so thoroughly researching the implications of her potential new role filled her with gratitude for their partnership. "What have you discovered?" she asked, settling into the chair across from his desk with a cup of tea. William looked up, his expression a mixture of fascination and concern. "The historical precedents are more extensive than I initially realized, but they're also more complex. European royal history includes several instances of women holding significant independent titles, but nothing quite matches what Father is proposing." He lifted a document from the pile before him. In the 16th century, Mary of Guise was granted extraordinary powers in Scotland, effectively ruling as regent. Catherine de' Medici wielded enormous influence in France, though her title was more traditional. There are examples of queen consorts who transcended their ceremonial roles to become genuine political actors. Catherine listened intently, understanding that these historical examples would provide both validation and caution for her own situation. What about more recent precedents? How have modern royal families handled similar innovations? That's where it becomes interesting, William replied, consulting his notes. The Scandinavian monarchies have been particularly progressive in modernizing their approaches to royal roles. Crown Princess Victoria of Sweden has been given responsibilities that were traditionally reserved for male heirs. Queen Margrethe of Denmark has maintained both ceremonial and political functions throughout her reign. The examples were encouraging, demonstrating that European monarchies had successfully adapted to changing times while maintaining their essential character. Catherine felt reassured that the British Crown was not venturing into completely uncharted territory. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Sir Clive Alderton, the King's private secretary, who had been granted the unusual privilege of an early morning visit to discuss the constitutional implications of the proposed title. His presence at Adelaide Cottage signalled the seriousness with which the palace was treating Catherine's decision. "Your Royal Highness," Sir Clive addressed Catherine with formal courtesy, "His Majesty has asked me to provide you with a comprehensive briefing on the legal and constitutional framework that would support the Duchess Royal title." Catherine appreciated the thoroughness of the approach. Every aspect of this unprecedented decision was being carefully examined and documented, ensuring that there would be no constitutional challenges or legal uncertainties if she chose to accept. "The Attorney General has reviewed the proposal extensively," Sir Clive continued, opening his briefcase to reveal more documents. "The legal foundation is sound, drawing upon ancient privileges of the Crown to create new titles and grant specific prerogatives. The precedent exists, even if it hasn't been used in this particular way before." William leaned forward, his interest clearly piqued by the constitutional details. "What about Parliament's reaction? Have there been any concerns raised about the creation of such a title?" Sir Clive's expression remained diplomatically neutral as he responded. "The Prime Minister has been thoroughly briefed and has expressed his support for the innovation. The Leader of the Opposition has also been consulted and, while surprised, has not raised objections. The general sentiment is that if such a title can strengthen the monarchy's service to the nation, it should be welcomed." Catherine felt some relief at this news. Political support would be crucial for the success of such an unprecedented change. The last thing she wanted was to become a source of constitutional controversy or partisan debate. "There is, of course, the matter of public opinion," Sir Clive acknowledged, addressing one of Catherine's primary concerns. "Polling data suggests that Your Royal Highness enjoys unprecedented approval ratings among the British public. The monarchy's popularity has actually increased during your years of service, which provides a strong foundation for this type of innovation." The polling data was encouraging, though Catherine knew that public opinion could shift rapidly, especially in response to significant changes. She had learned to appreciate support while never taking it for granted. "What would the practical timeline look like if I were to accept?" Catherine asked, beginning to engage with the implementation details. Sir Clive consulted his notes carefully. "The formal creation of the title would require several weeks of preparation. The College of Arms would need to design your personal coat of arms and standard. The Lord Chamberlain's office would need to establish new protocols for your role in state occasions. The House of Lords would need to be briefed on your rights and privileges as Duchess Royal." The complexity of the preparation was staggering, yet Catherine found herself impressed by the thoroughness of the planning. No detail was being overlooked, no potential challenge left unaddressed. "The investiture ceremony itself would be historic," Sir Clive continued. "His Majesty envisions a formal ceremony in the throne room at Buckingham Palace, with the creation of the title being announced simultaneously to Parliament and the Commonwealth nations. Catherine tried to imagine herself in such a ceremony, receiving a title that no woman had ever held before, making history while surrounded by centuries of tradition. The image was both thrilling and intimidating. After Sir Clive's departure, Catherine and William spent the morning walking through the gardens of their home, using the physical movement and fresh air to process the wealth of information they had received. The winter landscape provided a peaceful backdrop for their intense discussion. "I keep thinking about the children," Catherine said as they paused beside a frost-covered fountain. "Not just how this would affect them now, but what kind of monarchy they'll inherit. If I accept this title, I'm potentially changing the institution that George will one day lead." William considered this perspective carefully. "But isn't that exactly what we should be doing? Each generation of royals has adapted the monarchy to serve their times. Our children will face challenges we can't even imagine yet. Showing them that the institution can evolve while maintaining its essential purpose might be the greatest gift we can give them." The observation resonated deeply with Catherine. She had always believed in the importance of modernizing gradually, of finding ways to make ancient institutions relevant to contemporary society. The title of Duchess Royal could represent exactly that kind of thoughtful evolution. As they continued their walk, Catherine found herself thinking about all the women who had supported the British monarchy throughout history, many of whom had never received independent recognition for their contributions. Queen Mary had been instrumental in preserving royal treasures during World War II. The Queen Mother had provided crucial stability during the abdication crisis and the war years. Princess Anne had redefined what it meant to be a working royal through her tireless charitable efforts. "I think," Catherine said slowly, her breath visible in the cold air, "that I would be accepting this title not just for myself, but for all the women who served the crown without recognition, and for all the women who will serve in the future." William stopped walking and turned to face her, recognizing the significance of her words.
You've decided, haven't you? Catherine met his eyes, feeling a certainty that had been building throughout their conversation.
"I think I have. The responsibility is enormous, and the scrutiny will be intense, but the opportunity to serve, to make a real difference, to help modernize the monarchy while respecting its traditions, I don't think I can turn away from that." They stood together in their garden, the same space where their children played, and where they had shared countless quiet moments as a family. The decision that had seemed impossible just 24 hours earlier now felt not just possible but necessary. "We should call your father," Catherine said, using the family terminology that reflected their close relationship with the king. "I think it's time to tell him that Britain is about to have its first Duchess Royal." William's smile reflected pride, admiration, and just a touch of amazement at his wife's courage. They walked back toward the house together, their footsteps crunching on the frost-covered path, both understanding that they were about to make history. Inside Adelaide Cottage, as Catherine reached for the secure phone line that would connect her directly to Buckingham Palace, she reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought her to this moment. The shy university student who had caught a prince's eye had become a confident woman ready to accept unprecedented responsibility. The phone rang once before the king answered personally, his voice carrying a mixture of anticipation and concern. "Catherine, my dear, have you had sufficient time to consider our discussion?" "Yes, Your Majesty," Catherine replied, her voice steady and strong. "I am honored to accept the title of Duchess Royal, and I pledge to serve the crown and the British people with all the dedication and wisdom I can provide." The silence on the other end of the line stretched for several moments, and Catherine could imagine the king absorbing the historic significance of her acceptance. When he finally spoke, his voice carried deep emotion and profound satisfaction. "Catherine, you have just changed the course of British history. I could not be more proud to call you my daughter-in-law, and I cannot wait to call you Duchess Royal." As the call concluded with plans for an immediate meeting to begin preparations for the announcement, Catherine looked around the familiar comfort of her home, knowing that while the physical space would remain the same, everything else was about to change. She had awakened 2 days earlier as Catherine, Princess of Wales. Soon, she would make history as the first Duchess Royal in over 1,000 years of British monarchy. The ordinary Tuesday had indeed become extraordinary, and Catherine was ready to embrace the unprecedented role that awaited her. The announcement came precisely at noon on Friday, January 12th, 3 days after Catherine's birthday conversation with the king. By that time, the palace press office had orchestrated one of the most carefully planned royal announcements in modern history, with simultaneous briefings prepared for Parliament, Commonwealth governments, and media outlets around the world. Catherine stood beside William in the blue drawing room at Buckingham Palace, watching through the tall windows as crowds began to gather outside the gates. Word of the announcement had leaked just minutes before the official statement, and people were already congregating to witness what they instinctively knew was a historic moment. The king entered the room with the bearing of a man who understood he was about to make constitutional history. He carried himself with the confidence of someone who had spent months ensuring that every legal, historical, and practical aspect of this decision had been thoroughly examined and prepared. "The statement has been released," Charles announced, consulting his watch. "Within the hour, every major news organization in the world will be reporting that Britain has created its first Duchess Royal in over a millennium." Catherine felt a flutter of nervousness, but it was overshadowed by a growing sense of purpose and excitement. The decision had been made, the preparations completed, and now the world would learn of this unprecedented evolution in the British monarchy. Sir Clive Alderton appeared in the doorway, his expression a mixture of professional satisfaction and barely contained excitement.
"Your Majesty, the initial reactions are overwhelmingly positive."
The BBC is calling it a bold step into the modern era, and social media response has been remarkably supportive. The positive early reaction was encouraging, though Catherine knew that sustained public opinion would depend on how effectively she fulfilled the responsibilities that came with her new role. The title meant nothing without the substance to back it up. Within hours, the palace was inundated with interview requests from media organizations around the world. Catherine's first official interview as Duchess Royal-elect was scheduled for the following week, providing time for the constitutional experts to educate the public about the significance and implications of her new role. The children had been told that morning, in careful terms that emphasized service and responsibility rather than personal aggrandizement. George, at 11, grasped the historical significance more readily than his younger siblings, asking thoughtful questions about what this would mean for their family and for his own future role. "Will you still be our mummy?" Louis had asked with the directness that only a 6-year-old could muster, causing both Catherine and William to laugh and reassure him that nothing about their family relationships would change. Charlotte, ever perceptive, had focused on the practical implications. "Will you have to work more now, Mummy? Will you be away from home more often?" Her questions revealed the maturity and awareness that came from growing up in a family where duty and service were constant considerations. The formal investiture ceremony was scheduled for February 14th, Valentine's Day, a date chosen both for its symbolic appropriateness and for the practical consideration that it would fall during the parliamentary recess, allowing for maximum attendance from government officials. The College of Arms had worked with unprecedented speed to design Catherine's personal coat of arms as Duchess Royal. The heraldic design incorporated elements representing her charitable work, her commitment to education and mental health advocacy, and her role in modernizing the monarchy while respecting tradition. Her personal standard would fly alongside the royal standard during state occasions, marking her unique position within the constitutional framework. The sight of that flag would serve as a constant reminder that the British monarchy had evolved, that service and merit could be recognized alongside birth and tradition. The weeks leading up to the investiture were filled with briefings, protocol lessons, and careful preparation for the new responsibilities that would come with the title. Catherine worked with constitutional scholars to understand the full scope of her rights and privileges as Duchess Royal, particularly her unprecedented ability to address the House of Lords on matters of national importance. Her first speech to Parliament was already being planned, focusing on issues of mental health, education, and supporting vulnerable families, causes that had defined her royal work and would now receive the enhanced platform that came with her new constitutional role. The international reaction had been fascinating to observe. European royal families had sent congratulations, recognizing the significance of Britain's bold step in modernizing its monarchy. The Commonwealth nations had expressed support, viewing the creation of the Duchess Royal title as evidence of the monarchy's continued relevance and adaptability. American media coverage had been particularly extensive, with constitutional scholars drawing parallels to other historic moments when traditional institutions had evolved to meet changing times. The comparison to landmark legal and social changes throughout history placed Catherine's title in a broader context of progress and modernization. On the morning of February 14th, Catherine awakened in the Belgian suite at Buckingham Palace, having stayed in the palace the night before the ceremony, as tradition dictated. The elaborate gown that had been designed specifically for the investiture hung in the adjoining room, its deep blue silk embroidered with symbols representing her new role and her commitment to service. The ceremony itself took place in the throne room, with members of Parliament, representatives from the Commonwealth nations, and senior members of the royal family in attendance. The Archbishop of Canterbury presided over the religious aspects of the ceremony, while the King himself performed the historic act of creating Britain's first Duchess Royal. As Catherine knelt before the King, Receiving the insignia of her new title, she thought about all the women throughout British history who had served the crown with distinction but had never received such recognition. She thought about her own journey from university student to princess to this unprecedented role. Most importantly, she thought about the responsibility she was accepting and her determination to prove worthy of the trust being placed in her. Catherine Elizabeth, by the grace of God and the confidence of the realm, we do create you Duchess Royal, with all the rights, privileges, and responsibilities thereto belonging, the king pronounced, his voice carrying across the silent room and into history. The moment the ceremony concluded, Catherine was no longer simply Princess of Wales. She had become something that had never existed before. A woman holding an independent ducal title with constitutional responsibilities that transcended traditional royal roles. Her first act as Duchess Royal was to address the assembled dignitaries, speaking without notes about her commitment to using this unprecedented platform for the betterment of the British people and the strengthening of the Commonwealth bonds. I accept this title not as a personal honour, but as a sacred trust, Catherine said, her voice carrying clearly through the ornate room. I pledge to use the privileges granted to me in service of those who need advocacy, support, and representation. I pledge to honor the traditions of our monarchy, while working to ensure its continued relevance and service to our changing world. The applause that followed was not merely polite ceremony, but genuine appreciation for the historic moment they had witnessed and the commitment Catherine had just made. In the hours that followed the ceremony, as congratulations poured in from around the world and media coverage analyzed every aspect of the historic day, Catherine found a quiet moment with William and their children in the palace gardens. "Are you happy, Mummy?" Charlotte asked, taking her mother's hand as they walked along the familiar paths. Catherine considered the question carefully, thinking about the enormous responsibility she had just accepted, the scrutiny that would follow, and the opportunities to make a real difference that now lay before her. "I'm ready," she replied, squeezing her daughter's hand. "I'm ready to serve, ready to work hard, and ready to make you proud." As the sun set on February 14, 2026, Britain had its first Duchess Royal, and Catherine had embarked on a role that would define not only her own legacy, but the future evolution of the British monarchy itself. The quiet Tuesday that had begun with a normal family breakfast had transformed into a historic constitutional innovation that would be studied and celebrated for generations to come. Catherine had not just accepted a title, she had accepted the responsibility of proving that merit, dedication, and service could earn the highest recognition within the most traditional of institutions. The extraordinary had grown from the ordinary, and the British monarchy had taken a bold step into the future while honouring its remarkable past. Catherine, Duchess Royal, was ready to make history with every decision, every speech, and every act of service that would follow this unprecedented moment. The nation had witnessed something remarkable, and Catherine was prepared to spend the rest of her life proving worthy of the trust that had been placed in her as Britain's first Duchess Royal in over 1,000 years of royal history.